Hello friends, and welcome to part 5 in our Zacchaeus story. I am so excited about what we're going to look at in today's episode because this is what originally launched me into a study of the Zacchaeus story because of something I saw in the Hebrew scriptures, and I cannot wait for you to see this today. So I want to start with a couple of questions that were just absolutely nagging me when I came to the Zacchaeus story, and I want to help you see how they're all connected in their answer. So the first one is this: why does Zacchaeus respond the way he does? Recall, half of his possessions to the poor, a fourfold reimbursement to those he's cheated. So that's the first thing I'm like, it's just so weird about the story. And then the other question is who cares that it was a sycamore fig tree? Essentially, why do I need to know that? So Luke tells us it's a sycamore fig tree. And I want to begin with this because this is one of those things where it's really perplexing, but somehow this thing holds it all together. Now, Luke may be giving us the name of the tree to let us know this is one of the only trees, if not the only tree, where the branches grow really low to the ground and a grown man can climb on top of them without the branches snapping. And again, if Zacchaeus is small in height, in stature, then it would make sense for Luke to tell us this. What I want to ask, is there anything beyond this, or at least run the exploration route to go, is there something more going on? And the way that you do that, or one of the ways in Scripture, is that when you come to an interesting detail like sycamore fig tree, is to ask the question, does this show up anywhere else in the Scriptures? And if you were to do a search, you will find that the sycamore fig tree shows up 7 times in the scriptures. Once in the New Testament, here in Luke 19, 6 times in the Older Testament. And in looking at the references, there is one that pops, and it's from Amos chapter 7, verse 14. Amos answered Amaziah, I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I was a shepherd, and I also took care of sycamore fig trees. Clearly you see the reference to the sycamore fig trees here. I also want to highlight the word shepherd. And if you recall from our last episode, Jesus ends the narrative by saying the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That phrase, seek and save the lost, is coming out of the seminal chapter on shepherding in the Older Testament, Ezekiel 34, and Jesus quotes it in the Zacchaeus story. And so what's fascinating to me is that we have a reference to shepherd and we have a reference to sycamore fig tree, and knowing that sycamore fig tree only shows up 7 times in the Bible, there's too many connections going on here for me to go, I don't think anything's there. I think there's something here, and I think we need to run with this. So I want to look at the book of Amos, and I want to do this again through the Bible Project and the work they're doing there. So we spent some time in the last episode talking a bit about the work of the Bible Project. But in a brilliant 8-minute video on Amos that is animated, you're able to, again, download this. But here is the literary structure of the book of Amos. And whenever, like we talked about in our last episode, you think there might be a connection, you're looking for the broader context for whatever you're dealing with. So if we have this reference to Amos chapter 7, we want to look at all of Amos and saying, when was this written? What's the content of the book? What's going on? What is Amos's, calling all about? And we find that when you open up Amos and you connect who's ruling and all of that, is that this was written somewhere around 760 to 750 BC, so the middle of the 8th century. And it is a time where you have Jeroboam II who is ruling the northern kingdom. So from this graphic of the divided, within the graphic of the divided, you have the divided kingdom here. Within the larger graphic, you have the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. Amos actually lives in Judah. He lives in a place called Tekoa. And yet he's prophesying to the northern kingdom. And what's interesting is about 30 years after this, that northern kingdom is going to be taken out by Assyria. And there are going to be a number of reasons why that northern kingdom gets nailed, if you will, is because they're not living out what they're called to do. I'll help you understand that in just a few moments. But in the context of Amos, the biggest thing that Amos is doing is he is railing on the leaders of Israel for not maintaining justice and righteousness. And so in chapter 5, verse 24, right here at the heart of his book, he writes, "Let justice flow like a river and righteousness like an unending stream." And so this is the heartbeat of Amos. It's actually the heartbeat of other prophetic works as well by other authors, but this is central to what Amos is doing. Now, this idea of justice and righteousness is a major theme in the scriptures. In fact, I'm going to link a video that the Bible Project did on just justice that talks about both justice and righteousness. But if you want to go deeper with this, I'm going to link that at the bottom of the teaching as well. But this is introduced in Genesis chapter 18. So God says that the reason why he chose Abram was because he and his descendants were to be about maintaining justice and righteousness. So this is where the theme really starts playing out. Now, justice and righteousness is actually just two forms of justice. This is how we translate it in English, but in Hebrew, it's just two sides of the justice coin. So the word justice, what we translate in English as justice, is in Hebrew the word mishpat. And mishpat means retributive justice or legal justice. Righteousness, that's how we translate the English. In Hebrew, it's tzedakah, means distributive justice or social justice. Now, justice and righteousness is bigger than this, and in a moment I want to put the definitions that John and Tim from the Bible Project used when they did the Amos video. But what I just want you to see in this kind of delineation is just these different facets of justice. Now understand, when it comes to the social justice, the tzedakah, this is not socialism, okay? God is okay with people having wealth in the scriptures. It's what they do with their wealth that matters. But the idea here is that people need to have their basic needs met. That's the idea behind tzedakah. And the idea behind mishpat is that you have to have rules and regulations in place to protect individuals. And if people stomp on those rights of individuals, there has to be a way to deal with it, i.e. a legal justice response system. Now, again, what Tim and John did a great job of kind of helping us to understand this even at a deeper and maybe more encompassing level, because justice and righteousness is used all throughout the scriptures, and there's lots of different contexts with which they show up in. And so the way that the Bible Project does this was, for righteousness, they talk about a standard of right, equitable relationships between people no matter their social differences. The idea is that you're in a right relationship, and then if something breaks down between these relationships, then justice are the concrete actions you take to correct injustice and create righteousness. So this is a way in which we say, okay, all of this is ultimately about how we relate to people. And how we relate to people is how we relate to God. So if you remember from an earlier teaching we did, where Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? He says, you love God and you love others. You love neighbor. And the idea is you love God through loving others. And so ultimately it makes sense that within this idea of justice and righteousness, that the psalmist would write in Psalm 89:14, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Like of God administering his throne, his rule in the world, is that this is at the foundation. And when you step back and you look at the grand narrative, again in Genesis chapter 3, sin and death enter the created order and everything is shattered, and God puts a plan in place for the restoration of all things, and that plan picks up steam when God comes to Abram in Genesis 12 and he says, listen, I want to bless you and your descendants for other people then to be blessed, like the whole world be blessed through you, and you are to be about justice and righteousness. And this is the fundamental identity that gets played out in this idea of a kingdom of priests, which we talked about in an earlier episode, as well as that the Israelites were to represent God in the world, and ultimately everything shattered within the four relationships of life between God, others, ourselves, and creation. And so it makes sense that justice and righteousness has at its core right relationships. That's how the story gets back on track. That's how shalom gets injected in the midst of the chaos in our world. And so you can see how this just continues to play out. And in fact, there's another huge moment where the Queen of Sheba comes and she sees the height of the empire. It's under Solomon, and she says, listen, you are on the throne to maintain justice and righteousness. But as the story goes on, we find out that that doesn't happen, that the people don't live into that. The leaders of Israel and eventually the leaders of Judah, they don't do this as well. And so when Amos is on the scene, 30 years before the northern kingdom is going to get taken out, he's saying, listen, the issue is justice and righteousness. And there was idolatry as well and some other things, but core to the message of Amos is not living into justice and righteousness. And so you have then the story plays out, right? The northern kingdom gets taken out. 140 years later, the southern kingdom gets taken out for the same reasons as the northern kingdom. There's idolatry, there's some other issues, but central is the issue of justice and righteousness not happening in the land. And the people are looking to come back from their exile. They're back into the land when Jesus shows up on the scene, but they're under the boot of Rome. They still feel like that they're in exile. And Jesus' ministry is to reverse all of this, to bring it to the fruition that it was supposed to go to embody the things of God, to demonstrate to the people, this is how we live as the people of God. And so this is why the Zacchaeus story is so interesting to me, is that yes, Luke may tell us it is a sycamore fig tree because Zacchaeus is short in stature and he needs to climb up to a tree, and that would make sense if everybody knew it was a sycamore fig tree. But I think that's only part of it if in fact the reference is to Zacchaeus being short. Because anybody knows in the ancient world that when it comes to sycamore fig tree, that there is something unique about its fruit. And here's a picture of the fruit, and it's a sycamore fig tree. It's not a sycamore like the American sycamore. It's not like a fig tree. It's a hybrid. It's a sycamore fig tree. Its fruit looks like the figs from a fig tree, but they don't taste the same. They actually don't taste anywhere near as good as a fig tree does. And so the tree, the sycamore fig tree, produced fruit that the poor ate. Now that's interesting when we start thinking about Zacchaeus' response, where he's like, well, I'm going to give to the poor now, is that this is a tree that he has climbed that has fruit that the poor eat. Now let's take this another step further. When he comes down from the tree, again, he says, look, Lord, here now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. The word cheated here is in the Greek, because that's how we get Luke 19, is in the Greek, is sycophonteo. It means to cheat, to extort, to defraud. There's another word in Greek that's really similar. The root is the exact same, sycomorrhea. It's actually the word for sycamore fig tree, exactly its usage used here in Luke chapter 19. So I think that there is a linguistic connection going on here, and if you're hearing this in Greek, you can't help to make the connection that we have a sycamore fig tree, and we have someone who has cheated, someone who's been an extortionist, who has defrauded someone, and they share the exact same root. And in fact, there's a brilliant article written by a guy by the name of J. Lee Magnus, who talks about the linguistic connection and actually does a much deeper dive into the etymology, and it's fascinating. I'll have it linked at the bottom of the teaching at walkingthetext.com as well. But his summary statement is that he believes Luke is helping us to see there is a connection, and here's his summary statement. The point is not where Zacchaeus was, but what he was. And what he was highlighted by where he was. It's like brilliant, just kind of like kung fu stuff going on here right now. And his idea is what he's saying is that this tree shares the same root as someone who defrauds. It's also a tree that has fruit for the poor. And Zacchaeus, whose name in Hebrew is Zacchaeus, you'll remember from an earlier episode, is a word that means righteous or clean or innocent, which in this story he is not. He is unrighteous. He has defrauded people, and the irony is he climbs up onto the tree, a tree that shares the same root as defrauder, as a defrauder himself, and he is literally on the tree, which the fruit of the tree is eaten by the poor. He's literally climbing metaphorically on top of the poor. And as a result of the conversation he has with Jesus, his response is, I'm going to give half of my possessions to the poor. And he says he's going to do a fourfold reimbursement for those he's cheated. So here's the fascinating things, friends. Righteousness, justice. That when he gives to the poor, this is an act of righteousness. This is tzedakah. When he does this fourfold reimbursement, or he says, this is what I want to do, whether he's able to actually figure out everybody's cheated and it can all work out, and I don't know, but he's got this propensity, his desire, where he says, this is about justice, friends. This is a story that epitomizes justice and righteousness happening, and it's happening because of the involvement of what Jesus is doing and how he is seeking and saving the lost and bringing people back into the fold. Oh, come on. And friends, what's more, Zacchaeus is short, right? He is short of halikia, and as we've explored, probably not age, although that's what halikia can mean. It might be height. It's probably most certainly has an aspect of the social status to it. But here's the other thing that's so fascinating in connection to Amos, and why I believe Amos is at the backdrop of the Zacchaeus story, is that in chapter 7, Amos gets a vision. And in the vision, by the way, this is the same chapter where Amos identifies himself as both a shepherd and a dresser of the fig trees. This is what it says, verse 1. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the late crops were coming up. When they had stripped the land clean, I cried out, Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? Which is a reference to Israel. He is so small. What? He's short? This is what's going on. So the Lord relented. This will not happen, the Lord said. Verse 4, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire, dried up the great deep and devoured the land. Okay, so here's another vision here. And Amos cried out, Sovereign Lord, I beg you stop. How can Jacob, right, Israel, survive? He is so small or short. So here you have this idea that Israel is not living into justice and righteousness. God is going to deal with it. And Amos is saying, but they're so small. And it just seems to me that Zacchaeus is representing who Israel was supposed to be and who they were not, and who Jesus was ultimately calling them to become. That there's a connection here with Amos with the short part. Because then this is what happens next. Verse 6, so the Lord relented. This will not happen. This is what he showed me, verse 7. The Lord was standing by a plumb that had been built, a wall that had been built true to plumb. So a plumb line is that you hold it up and it keeps it straight. This is what a building was supposed to be, and it's who Israel's supposed to be. And then it says, the Lord asked me, what do you see, Amos? A plumb line, I replied. Then the Lord said, look, I am setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. God goes, I have to straighten them out. And at the end of chapter 7, the last verse, and Israel will surely go into exile away from their native land. Because God says, I have to deal with the fact that they're not living out justice and righteousness. And I have to deal with this because the story has to keep moving, but we need to correct the course that's going the direction that it is. And then in chapter 9, at the very end, verse 14, it ends in verse 15, but verse 14, God says, I will bring my people back from exile. So there is hope in all of this. And here's where I just feel like the Amos is at the backdrop, because again, when God brought Israel out of Egypt, he brought them into the desert to be Abraham's children, to teach them what it is to be about justice and righteousness, to live into identity of a kingdom of priests who mediates on God's behalf, who's blessed for the sake of other people, to give, to love people well. And they go into the desert to learn this. And when they exit from their desert into the promised land, they cross over the Jordan River just opposite of Jericho. And when they go into the land, they do not live into this identity and calling. And what happens is in Luke 3, John is at this place right now calling the people back. And he's telling tax collectors, don't defraud anymore. And then Jesus is baptized there because Jesus' entire ministry is to be the fulfillment of the entire storyline. And Jesus is going to go after issues of justice and righteousness and shalom and deal with the chaos and the brokenness. And he's going to teach people how to live into their identity of being God's people. And that's why when the narrative ends and Jesus calls Zacchaeus, now a child of Abraham, is the one who was unrighteous has become righteous. And Israel failed. They were unrighteous and they're called to be righteous. Is that this whole story to me is Jesus bringing everything to a fulfillment to live out the calling that the Messiah who was to come prophesied in Isaiah 9 would be a Prince of Shalom, that they would be about justice and righteousness. And when Jesus finds Zacchaeus in a tree, in a sycamore-fig tree, I think all of these layers are in play, and it just helps us to see just how deep Jesus' ministry is going and how it's connecting to the entire biblical story. So friends, there you go. I think Amos is in the backdrop. So, thanks so much for watching. Head over to walkingthetext.com if you'd like. I'm going to have a list of questions to help you go deeper with some of the issues addressed in this teaching. You can leave your questions. I've got one more topic that I want to tackle, and then we're going to do an episode where I answer your questions. And also just know at walkingthetext.com, I will hyperlink a number of articles and things that you can do to go deeper with this particular topic. And I hope that your mind is just kind of gone like this again today with just how deep the biblical stories go, and they're all like this, and it's been so much fun to tackle the Zacchaeus story. So one more week of something I want to tackle, and then we'll do a week of your questions. And again, thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for listening, and may you walk out the text well in your life.